The Galactic Assembly had existed for 12,000 years. It was the oldest and most powerful organization in the known universe. Hundreds of alien species had joined it over the centuries. They traded with each other. They shared technology. They kept peace across 3 spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy. Wars were rare because the Assembly punished aggression severely. Every species understood the rules. Every species followed them. At least, they used to. Humanity had joined the Assembly only 60 years ago. In galactic terms, they were newborns. Their technology was basic compared to the elder races. Their bodies were soft and fragile. They lived such short lives that most aliens found it almost tragic. A human could be born, grow old, and die in the time it took some species to finish a single meal. They seemed weak. They seemed harmless. But something about humans made the older races uncomfortable. There was a look in their eyes, a hunger, a refusal to accept limits. The Assembly watched them carefully, and after just 2 decades they created a new rule. It was simple. It was clear. Do not tamper with Earth's fleet. Admiral Jack stood on the bridge of the S Resolute. It was the flagship of Earth's Third Fleet, a massive warship that carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Jack was 52 years old. His hair had turned silver at the sides, but his body was still strong. His eyes were sharp and cold like winter ice. He had commanded ships for 30 years. He had fought in 3 wars. He had buried friends and enemies alike. Nothing surprised him anymore. Commander Lisa Hart stood beside him. She was his second in command, a woman in her early 40s with short brown hair and a calm face. She watched the tactical display with steady attention. Green dots represented friendly ships. The Third Fleet had 27 vessels spread across the sector. They were on a routine patrol near the neutral corridor, a stretch of empty space that belonged to no one. Lieutenant Ben Torres worked at the communications station. He was young, barely 25, with nervous energy that made him fidget constantly. He suddenly sat up and turned toward the admiral. He reported that they were receiving a transmission from the delegation. Jack nodded slowly. He told Ben to put it through. The main flickered and came to life. A face appeared. It was not human. There were reptilian creatures with scales that shimmered in different colors depending on their mood. They had 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on their faces. This particular was old. His scales had faded to a dull gray. His name was Ambassador Al, and he was one of the most powerful politicians in space. Al spoke through a translation device that turned his hissing language into flat English words. He called Jack by his title and told him that his fleet was trespassing in the neutral corridor. He demanded that they withdraw immediately. Jack kept his expression neutral. He explained that the neutral corridor was open to all Assembly members. He said they were conducting a routine patrol and nothing more. His voice was polite but firm. Al's scales shifted to a darker shade. He claimed that their patrols made his allies nervous. He said the Dominion found the human presence provocative. Jack almost smiled at that. The Dominion was a military alliance of 3 aggressive species. They had been expanding their territory for centuries, swallowing smaller civilizations. The Assembly tolerated them because they were too powerful to challenge directly, but they had never threatened humanity. They were smart enough to know better. Jack told Al that if the Dominion had complaints, they should file them with the Assembly. Until then, the Third Fleet would continue its mission. Al leaned closer to the screen. His 3 eyes narrowed with barely hidden anger. He told Jack that humans thought themselves untouchable. He said they believed their little fleet frightened everyone. He assured Jack that it did not frighten them. The transmission ended abruptly. The screen went dark. Lisa turned to face Jack. She kept her voice low so the bridge crew would not hear. She told him that intelligence reports indicated they had been meeting secretly with the Dominion. She believed they were planning something dangerous. Jack stared at the empty screen for a long moment. He knew they were proud and foolish. They resented humanity's rapid rise in the Assembly. They hated that a species so young had already gained so much respect. but surely they would not be stupid enough to start a war. He finally spoke. He said they had been warned. Every species in the assembly knew the rule. You do not tamper with Earth's fleet. Lisa asked him what would happen if they ignored the warning. Jack's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists at his sides. He said they would learn why that rule existed. The Third Fleet continued its patrol for the next several days. Jack ordered increased sensor sweeps and combat drills. His captains pushed their crews hard. They practiced battle formations and emergency protocols. Some of the younger officers complained about the extra work. The veterans stayed quiet. They had seen the look in the admiral's eyes. They knew something was coming. On the fifth day, Lisa brought Jack a report from their spy network. They were mobilizing their home fleet. The Dominion had sent warships to support them. Combined, they had over 400 vessels gathering near the neutral corridor. It was the largest military force assembled in that region for over a century. Jack read the report carefully. He asked Lisa what she thought they wanted. Lisa said she believed they wanted to test humanity. They wanted to see if the stories were true. They wanted to know if humans were really as dangerous as everyone claimed. Jack set down the report. He walked to the observation window and looked out at the stars. So many lights in the darkness. So many worlds full of living creatures who had no idea what was about to happen. He said they would get their answer. He just hoped they were ready for it. Lisa joined him at the window. She asked if he had ever seen humanity go to war. Real war, not the small conflicts they had fought before joining the assembly. Jack shook his head. He said he had not. His generation had grown up in peacetime, but his grandfather had told him stories. Stories about the old wars on Earth, about cities burning, about armies clashing, about the terrible things humans did to each other when they had no other choice. He turned to face her. He said he hoped they never had to learn those lessons, but if they forced humanity's hand, they would discover something important. Humans did not fight to win. Humans fought until there was nothing left to fight. They fought until their enemies were dust and memory. Lisa nodded slowly. She understood. The warning had been given. Now they could only wait and see if anyone was foolish enough to ignore it. 3 weeks passed after the warning from Ambassador Al. The Third Fleet remained on patrol near the neutral corridor. Nothing happened. The ships stayed in their own territory. The Dominion made no aggressive moves. Some officers began to relax. They thought the crisis had passed. They thought the aliens had come to their senses. Admiral Jack knew better. He had seen this pattern before. The calm before violence. The silence before screaming. Captain Grant commanded the destroyer S. Vigilant. He was 38 years old with a strong build and a quick smile. His crew loved him because he treated them like family. He remembered their birthdays. He knew their children's names. He had served with many of them for over a decade. The Vigilant was a small ship compared to the mighty Resolute, but was proud of her. She was fast and tough and had never let him down. The Vigilant was running security sweeps near Arcturus Station, a human outpost on the edge of assembly space. The main fleet was resupplying at the station while ship patrolled the surrounding area. It was routine work, boring work. Stood on his bridge drinking coffee and watching the stars drift past. Ensign Amy Wells sat at the sensor station. She was barely 23, fresh from the academy, eager to prove herself. Her voice suddenly changed. It became tight and nervous. She reported sensor contact, multiple signatures emerging from subspace, configuration unknown. Set down his coffee and moved to her station. He asked how many. Amy's fingers flew across her console. She said 32 vessels. Then she corrected herself. 38. They were still coming. Watched the display as ship after ship appeared from nowhere. They materialized in perfect formation around the Vigilant. Their hulls were sleek and predatory. He recognized the design immediately. Warships, but they had been modified with technology he did not recognize. Strange weapons, enhanced shields. Someone had upgraded them. Lieutenant Chris Palmer reported from Tactical. He said the enemy was jamming their communications. They could not reach the fleet. Felt his stomach tighten. 40 warships against one destroyer. The odds were impossible. Any sane commander would surrender, but had not joined the fleet to surrender. He ordered battle stations. He told Chris to charge all weapons. The bridge crew moved with desperate efficiency. Alarms howled through the ship, ran to their posts. The Vigilant was a small ship, but her crew was well trained. They would not go down without a fight. A transmission broke through the jamming static. The face that appeared was, but not Al. This was a military commander, a female with scales darker than coal. Her 3 eyes gleamed with hunger and anticipation. She introduced herself as Fleet Commander of the Alliance. She told that his vessel was now their prisoner. She demanded that he surrender his ship and his crew. She said the alternative was destruction. Stood very still for a long moment. The bridge had gone silent. Every eye watched him. Every breath waited for his response. Then smiled. It was a cold expression, the kind of smile a wolf makes before it bites. He asked if she knew what her people had done. Seemed confused by the question. She said they had struck first. They had seized the advantage. Shook his head slowly. He said no. He said they had made a mistake, the worst mistake their species would ever make. Laughed at that. She mocked him, 1 destroyer against 40 warships. She called his arrogance amusing. Smile did not waver. He told her that he was not talking about his ship. He was talking about what came next. He nodded to Chris, who pressed a hidden button on his console. A quantum burst signal shot out from the Vigilant. It traveled through dimensions that normal communications could not reach. No jamming technology could block it. No enemy could intercept it. The signal reached the Resolute in seconds. It carried one simple message: we are under attack. His expression changed as her tactical officer reported the signal. She demanded to know what had done. Told her that he had called for help. He said that when Earth's fleet came for them, and they would come, they would not stop until every ship that participated in this attack was burning wreckage. Snarled an order. The first volley struck the Vigilant before could say another word. The bridge erupted in fire and chaos. Consoles exploded. Metal screamed as the hull twisted under the assault, was thrown against the bulkhead. His head struck something hard. Blood streamed from a gash above his eye. He could hear his crew screaming. Amy Wells died at her station. A piece of shrapnel caught her in the throat. She was 23 years old. She had never seen her since leaving for the academy. Chris Palmer kept firing until a secondary explosion tore through Tactical. He saved 2 by pushing them clear. He did not save himself. The Vigilant fought for 18 minutes. She destroyed 7 enemy vessels and damaged 12 more before her engines finally failed. It was a remarkable achievement, impossible by any tactical measure. But Grant was not fighting to win. He was fighting to hurt them. He was fighting to make them pay for every life they took. When the firing stopped, the Vigilant drifted in space like a broken toy. Boarding parties forced their way through the shattered hull. They found on the bridge, still alive, still smiling through the blood on his face. Came aboard personally. She stood over and looked down at him with contempt. She asked him why he was smiling. His ship was destroyed. His crew was dead or captured. He had lost. Looked up at her with eyes that held no fear. He told her that he had not lost. He had delayed them. He had sent the signal. He had bought time. Asked what that mattered. She said humanity was weak. She said the assembly would do nothing. She said the Alliance would crush Earth's pathetic fleet. Laughed at that. Blood bubbled on his lips, but he laughed anyway. He told her she had no idea what was coming. He said she had tampered with Earth's fleet. He said everyone in the galaxy knew what happened to species who did that. Struck him across the face. She ordered her soldiers to take him away. Grant was executed 3 days later. They recorded it and broadcast the footage across assembly space. They wanted to intimidate humanity. They wanted to show the galaxy that humans could be killed like anyone else. They did not understand what they had done. They did not know that every human who watched that footage felt something ancient and terrible awaken inside them. They did not realize that Grant's smile haunted their dreams because he knew something they did not. Humanity was coming, and humanity was angry. Part 3, The Response. Admiral Jack received the quantum burst signal in his quarters aboard the Resolute. He was reading a book when the alarm sounded. He set the book aside and walked to his personal terminal. The message was short, 3 words: "We are under attack." It came from the Vigilant. It came from Grant. Jack stared at those 3 words for a long time. He had known for 15 years. He had watched him rise from a nervous ensign to a confident captain. He had attended his wedding. He had held his newborn daughter, was more than a subordinate. He was family. Jack stood up slowly. His hands were steady. His breathing was calm. But inside, something cold and terrible was growing. He walked to the bridge with measured steps. Every officer who saw him moved out of his way. There was something in his eyes that made them afraid. He reached the bridge and stood at the center console. Commander Lisa Hart turned to greet him, but the words died on her lips when she saw his expression. Jack spoke in a voice that carried across the entire bridge. He told Lisa to signal all ships. Code Omega. Lisa's face went pale. Code Omega was the highest alert level in the human fleet. It meant total war. It meant no mercy. It required confirmation from Earth Command before activation. She reminded Jack of this requirement. She said they needed authorization. Jack looked at her with eyes like frozen steel. He said Earth Command would confirm. He told her to send the signal. Lisa hesitated for only a moment. Then she turned to her console and transmitted the order. Within minutes, every ship in the Third Fleet received the message. Captains who had been sleeping woke up. Officers who had been relaxing rushed to their stations. The fleet transformed from a routine patrol into a weapon of war. But Jack was not finished. He ordered Ben Torres to send emergency transmissions to every human fleet in the galaxy. First Fleet near Sol, Fifth Fleet in the Orion sector, Seventh Fleet at the shipyards. He wanted them all. He wanted every warship humanity possessed. Ben asked if they were really going to war. Jack did not answer. He simply stared at the tactical display, watching his fleet assemble around the Resolute. On the Assembly's capital world, the council chamber descended into chaos. Representatives from hundreds of species shouted and argued. The ambassador sat frozen in his seat, his scales fading to a sickly gray color. He had not known about the attack. He had not authorized it, but that did not matter now. High Counselor called for order. She was one of the ancient telepathic species who had helped found the Assembly 12,000 years ago. Her body was thin and fragile, but her mind was powerful enough to silence the entire chamber with a thought. She declared that the attack was unsanctioned. She said the sovereignty had acted without Assembly approval. She demanded explanations. The Terran ambassador rose from her seat. Her name was Nancy Cole. She was 55 years old with gray hair and a pleasant face that hid a razor-sharp mind. She had served humanity for 3 decades. She had negotiated treaties that saved millions of lives. But today, her pleasant expression was gone. Nancy asked if it mattered that the attack was unsanctioned. She said they were an Assembly member. She said they had attacked human ships. They had captured human crew. They had killed human soldiers. Tried to calm her. She said the Assembly would mediate. She promised that justice would be served through proper channels. Nancy stood very still. She let the silence stretch until every representative was watching her. Then she spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the chamber. She said the Assembly had one rule regarding humanity, one simple rule that every member species learned upon joining. Do not tamper with Earth's fleet. She said they knew this rule. She said the Dominion knew this rule. She said they broke it anyway. Nancy gathered her documents and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the silent chamber. A called after her. She asked Nancy to wait. She begged to know what humanity intended to do. Nancy paused at the doorway. She turned to face the council one last time. Her voice was calm and cold and absolutely certain. She said humanity would do what they always did, what they had done since they first crawled out of the oceans of there. They would protect their own. They would avenge their dead, and they would make certain that no species ever made this mistake again. She walked out without another word. The chamber remained silent for a long time after she left. The representatives looked at each other with fear in their eyes. They had heard stories about humans. They had dismissed most of them as exaggeration. Now they wondered if the stories had been understatements. Across the galaxy, human fleets began to move. Ships that had been scattered across dozens of sectors converged on a single point. Captains who had never met each other exchanged tactical data. Engineers pushed engines beyond their rated limits. Weapons officers loaded ammunition that had been stored for decades, hoping it would never be needed. On Earth, the planetary defense grid went a full alert. Civilians watched the news in confusion and growing fear. The government released a statement confirming that human forces had been attacked. They promised a swift and decisive response. Admiral Jack received word that Grant had been executed. He received it alone in his quarters. He watched the footage that they had broadcast. He watched his friend die with a smile on his face. Jack did not cry. He did not scream. He simply sat in the darkness and remembered every moment he had shared with, every joke, every argument, every mission they had survived together. Then he stood up and walked back to the bridge. His face was carved from stone. His voice was steady and calm. He announced to his crew that Captain Grant was dead. He said 63 other crew members had died with him. He said their bodies were still in enemy hands. He paused and looked at every officer on the bridge. He told them that they were going to get those bodies back. They were going to burn a path through anyone who stood in their way. They were going to teach the galaxy a lesson that would never be forgotten. He asked if anyone had objections. No one spoke. Jack nodded once. He ordered the fleet to set course for space, maximum speed. The war had begun. The combined human fleet dropped out of subspace above Prime exactly 1 week after the attack on the Vigilant. 218 warships, battle cruisers, destroyers, carriers, support vessels. It was the largest concentration of human military power ever assembled outside the Sol system. The ships hung in space like a cloud of angry metal, their weapons charged and ready. Admiral Jack stood on the bridge of the Resolute. He looked at the enemy formation scrambling to respond to the sudden arrival. The home fleet numbered 300 vessels. Another 100 warships supported them, 400 against 200. The defenders had the numbers. They had the home field advantage. They had orbital defense platforms and ground-based weapons. By any mathematical calculation, the humans should lose. Jack almost smiled at the thought. Mathematics had never understood human warfare. Commander Lisa Hart reported that the High Command was requesting communication. Jack told her to open a channel. Fleet Commander appeared on the... Her dark scales had lost some of their luster. Her 3 eyes moved nervously. She was not as confident as she had been when she captured the Vigilant. She called the attack unprecedented. She said the assembly would condemn humanity for this aggression. Jack's voice was quiet and cold. He asked her if she called this aggression. He reminded her that she had captured one of their ships. She had killed Captain Grant and 63 members of his crew. She had broadcast their executions to intimidate humanity. He stepped closer to the screen. He told her that was not aggression. That was a declaration of war. His voice became desperate. She offered to negotiate. She promised to return the survivors. She offered reparations. Jack shook his head slowly. He said there would be no negotiation. He turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Daniel Hayes, and gave the order, "All ships commence attack." The human fleet surged forward like a wave of destruction. What followed would be studied by military historians across the galaxy for centuries. The battle lasted 9 hours. 9 hours of constant fighting. 9 hours of explosions and death and terrible violence. Human ships fought with a ferocity that logic. They took damage that should have been fatal and kept firing. They refused to retreat even when surrounded. They sacrificed themselves to protect damaged allies. A crippled cruiser rammed an enemy battleship rather than surrender. A carrier kept launching fighters until its flight deck collapsed into molten slag. But more than raw courage, the humans fought with creativity that the rigid commanders could not match. They adapted in real time. When one strategy failed, they invented another within seconds. They coordinated through intuition as much as communication. They seemed to know what their fellow captains would do before orders were given. Commander Laura led her destroyer squadron directly into the enemy formation. It was suicide by any rational measure, but Laura was not being rational. She was being human. Her ships drew fire from the main fleet while the heavier cruisers flanked the enemy flagship. By the time realized the trap, it was too late. Captain Adams commanded the carrier Freedom. He launched wave after wave of fighter craft. Small, fast ships piloted by men and women who knew they might not survive. They overwhelmed the enemy's point defense systems. They created chaos and confusion. They died by the dozens, but they never stopped coming. Lieutenant Commander Sam Wheeler led a boarding party onto a cruiser. His team of 50 Marines fought through corridors filled with enemy soldiers. They captured the ship's engine room and turned its own weapons against the fleet. Sam lost 32 of his people. He did not stop fighting until the ship was his. The commanders could not understand what they were seeing. Their tactical computers calculated impossible odds. Their sensors showed human ships absorbing damage that should have destroyed them. Their crews watched in horror as vessel after vessel fell to the relentless human assault. By the battle's end, the home fleet was shattered. 174 enemy vessels destroyed, 37 captured. The remainder fled into deep space, their crews traumatized by what they had witnessed. Human losses were significant: 41 ships destroyed, 63 damaged, thousands of sailors dead, but they had won. Admiral Jack walked through the ruined corridors of the command station. Human soldiers had secured it 2 hours earlier. Bodies littered the floors. Scorch marks decorated the walls. The smell of smoke and death filled the air. He found Fleet Commander in her command center. She was surrounded by the bodies of her staff. She had not surrendered. She had fought until a human Marine shot her twice in the chest. She was still alive, but barely. Jack knelt beside her. He looked at the creature who had killed his friend. His breathing was shallow and wet. Her 3 eyes struggled to focus on his face. She spoke in a whisper that her translator barely caught. She said she did not understand. She said humans seemed so weak, so fragile, so short-lived. She asked how creatures like them could be so dangerous. Jack was quiet for a moment. He thought about Grant. He thought about all the men and women who had died in this battle. He thought about the ancient history of his species, the wars, the plagues, the disasters that should have destroyed them but never did. He told the truth. He said humans were dangerous because they were fragile, because they were short-lived. They had learned that everything they loved could be taken from them in an instant, so they fought for it with everything they had. They did not fight to survive. They fought to win. They fought until their enemies were gone forever. His breathing slowed. Her scales lost their color. She said the galaxy would fear humanity now. Jack shook his head. He said the galaxy would remember them. He said there was a difference. Died with those words in her ears. Jack stood up slowly. He walked out of the command center and back toward the shuttle that would take him to his ship. The battle was over. The war was won, but he felt no joy. He felt only emptiness and exhaustion. He thought about the message he would have to send to his wife, the words he would have to find, the grief he would have to share. Victory had a price. It always did. Humans understood that better than anyone. 6 months passed after the Battle of Prime. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The sovereignty no longer existed. Their government had collapsed within weeks of their defeat. Their territories were placed under assembly administration. Their military was disbanded. Their leaders faced trial for war crimes. A species that had once been proud and powerful was now broken and scattered. The Dominion had withdrawn from all alliance agreements. Their representatives had issued formal apologies. They paid massive reparations to the families of the human soldiers who died. They dismantled their border fortifications. They opened their space to assembly inspectors. The Dominion had watched their allies burn, and they wanted no part of humanity's anger. The Galactic Assembly convened a special session on the capital world. Representatives from every member species filled the council chamber. The air was thick with tension and fear. Everyone knew why they had gathered. Everyone wanted to hear what humanity would say. Ambassador Nancy Cole stood at the speaker's platform. She looked older than she had 6 months ago. The war had aged her. The death had aged her, but her voice was still strong when she spoke. She began by reminding the council of history. She said the assembly had existed for 12,000 years. It was founded on principles of mutual respect and non-aggression. Those principles had served them well. They had maintained peace across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. They had created a civilization that spanned thousands of worlds. She paused and looked around the chamber. Her eyes met the gaze of every representative who dared to look back. She said that somewhere along the way, some of them had forgotten what those principles meant. They had grown arrogant. They had grown complacent. They had started to believe that they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. They had looked at humanity and seen only weakness. They had seen short and soft bodies and primitive technology. They had not seen the truth. Nancy stepped forward. Her voice grew harder, colder. She said humanity had not joined the assembly seeking conquest. They had not come to the stars looking for enemies. They came because they were explorers. They came because they believed the universe held wonders beyond imagination. They wanted to see those wonders. They wanted to share them with others. But they were also survivors. Their history was written in blood and fire. They had fought plagues that killed millions. They had fought famines that starved entire continents. They had fought world wars that nearly destroyed their planet. They had faced extinction more times than they could count. And they had climbed out of every grave that fate had dug for them. They had learned through all that suffering one fundamental truth. Nancy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The chamber was so silent that everyone could hear her clearly. She said, "You do not threaten what humans love. You do not harm what they protect. Because if you do, if you push them to that point, they will burn everything to ashes before they let you take it from them." She straightened and looked around the chamber once more. She reminded them that they knew the rule. The Dominion knew the rule. They tampered with Earth's fleet anyway. Now the civilization existed only in history books and memorial stones. There was occupied. Their people were refugees. Their name had become a warning. She said this should be the lesson. This should be the warning that echoed through the next 12,000 years. Humanity wanted peace. Humanity offered friendship. Humanity hoped to never fight another war like this one. But if anyone ever threatened them again, they would learn that humans were also very good at war. Nancy walked away from the platform without waiting for a response. Her footsteps echoed in the silent chamber. No one tried to stop her. No one had anything to say. In the weeks that followed, the assembly passed new laws. The restrictions on human expansion were lifted. Humanity gained permanent seats on every major council. Their trade rights expanded dramatically. Their voice in galactic politics grew louder than species who had been members for thousands of years. Some representatives complained that it was unfair. They said humanity was being rewarded for violence. They said the assembly should not give in to threats. The High Counselor listened to these complaints with ancient patience. Then she reminded them of a simple fact. Humanity had not started the war. They had tried to avoid it. They had warned them repeatedly. They had followed every rule and protocol. When the attack came, they had simply responded in the way their nature demanded. She said the assembly was not rewarding violence. They were acknowledging reality. Humanity was a force to be respected. The sooner everyone accepted that, the safer the galaxy would be. Admiral Jack retired from active duty 1 year after the battle. He had served humanity for over 3 decades. He had fought in more battles than he could remember. He had lost friends and enemies and pieces of himself along the way. It was time to rest. He returned to Earth and bought a small house near the ocean. He spent his days walking on the beach and watching the waves. Sometimes he thought about Grant. Sometimes he thought about all the others who had died. He never forgot them. He carried their memories like stones in his pocket. Commander Lisa Hart took command of the Third Fleet. She was promoted to Admiral 2 years later. She continued Jack's legacy with skill and dedication. The fleet remained strong. The fleet remained ready. On every world in the Assembly, in every military academy, in every language spoken across the galaxy, new officers learned the same lesson on their first day of training. Their instructors repeated it until they could recite it in their sleep. There is one rule that supersedes all others, one warning that must never be ignored. Do not tamper with Earth's fleet. They had known this rule. They had ignored it anyway. They had believed that humans were weak because they were small and fragile and died so quickly. They had not understood that humans were dangerous precisely because they knew how fragile life was. They fought to protect it with every fiber of their being. They fought with a desperation that no long-lived species could match. They fought because they knew that tomorrow was never guaranteed. The galaxy remembered this lesson. Peace lasted for generations. Wars became rare. Species that once would have attacked each other instead chose diplomacy. All because of one simple rule. Do not tamper with Earth's fleet. They knew they did it anyway, and they paid the price. Humanity hoped no one else would make the same mistake. But if they did, humanity would be ready. They always were.